Welcome back to another edition of Grok Talk. This week, my guests are Mke Rogers, a longtime Granite Grok contributor, a British transplant, and a newly minted U.S. citizen. We're going to talk about Trump and Doge and the judiciary. And following Mike is Kimberly Morin, who is head of the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire, also a longtime Granite Grok contributor. She's going to join me to talk about some anti-gun bills that are currently making their way through the New Hampshire legislature. So stay tuned. Welcome back to another edition of Grok Talk. Today I have two guests, and my first one is here with us right now, Mke Rogers, a longtime contributor to GraniteGrok.com and a friend of ours and a friend of many of you, and very big in politics, been very active, and he has a very unique, interesting perspective, and since I don't think we've talked about it on the program, he is a recently newly minted U.S. citizen. Hey, Mike.
Yeah, so the funny accent and all that, as I think I said many years ago outside the State House, I got a British accent, but I'm not Piers Morgan and I support the Second Amendment. But, aside from all that, after nearly 40 years and deciding there's no way in hell I'm ever going to go back to the commie hellhole that the UK has become, that the right thing to do was to take citizenship. And I got it just in time to add my vote to number 47. So I think I did the right thing at the right time for the right reason. And, probably about 10 years after I came to this country, I started to really understand what the American experiment was about. And I've always been a strong supporter of the Constitution, certainly before I met the Grok crew in the early 2000s. And started first helping at events and then writing, and well, not so much writing recently since I've been rearranging my life, but everything is going extremely well. If work ever peters out, I'll write full time, but for now, work is keeping me very busy, and as my new young lady says, pays me stupid money to keep doing it. So, I'll take it and save it while I can get it. Anyway. So I chose to become a citizen because it's the right time for the right reason. I absolutely support the Constitution. I support originalism, which means that I'm far more along the lines of Clarence Thomas, Scalia, and Gorsuch than I am about John Roberts and the Wimps.
Yes, and we started to have a conversation about this before we went live, or started recording, I guess is a better way to put it. And why don't we start with that? They don't want anybody doing this. They're coming up with every excuse they can, and they're looking for any judge they can find who will put a stop to it.
They are. And by the way, the first argument to put down, and I think put down is probably the right approach since it needs to die preferably painfully, is the people didn't elect Elon Musk to do this. Well, actually, they did. Because Trump built his campaign on a variety of things, not the least of which restoring prosperity, shrinking government, and restoring the American experiment. And the more you listen to him, and especially after the assassination attempts, it wasn't about any kind of pomposity or how grandiose he was. It was about restoring the American dream, the American experiment, to limit the government more than anything else, and to reorient America domestically and in the world in line with the founders' thinking. I mean, this guy almost brings me to tears. He wants to refound America, not in his image. No, it's not about him. It's about the founders and the vision of America. And that's what makes him unique, and that's what's made him appeal. Which brings me back to Elon Musk, because it's not that Elon Musk bought Donald Trump. The guy can't be bought anyway, or bought the country. What Elon Musk has done is become more and more of a libertarian and more of a free speech advocate, but most especially This guy knows how to build companies, run companies, and keep them within bounds. And Trump brought him along on the stage and made it absolutely crystal clear to anybody who was going to vote for him that he was going to set Elon Musk and his team loose on finding where government was going astray and cutting the costs. And cutting the costs is absolutely paramount because the country faces bankruptcy. Doesn't $36 trillion or 37 as it's approaching scare anybody? Well, it doesn't scare enough people, clearly. And that's really the problem. But it did scare more than 50% of the electorate and almost 2/3 of the states into voting for the ticket. Now, the ticket was Trump and Vance, and they're a pair of very sensible people. Vance especially is turning out to be very eloquent, very much on the money, and absolutely, again, an American patriot. And it was interesting to watch his conversion against and then for Trump as he realized what Trump stood for wasn't, hey, I'm Trump and I'm about me, but I'm Trump and I'm about the country. And that's the big thing. So you see them on stage, they say exactly what they're going to do, and Trump gets the majority vote, and surprise, as promised, he sets Elon Musk loose on the government. And boy, oh boy, did it need it. The Doge is taking a bite out of government. In fact, it's taking so many bites that the government is going to lose some limbs, and it needs to. It's not a four-legged beast like the Doge. It is, in fact, a multi-tentacled octopus or worse, with hundreds of agencies, many of which have no constitutional basis, many more of which don't even have a basis in law because they were created by executive fiat and therefore can be disposed of by executive fiat, which is even nicer. And all of them spend too much. And as is being revealed, what's really even more interesting, they're spending too much, mostly borrowed money, on things that you never voted for. But not only that you never voted for, but that the president didn't ask for. The state has become self-perpetuating. It is reliving or illustrating one of Reagan's maxims. Nothing resembles eternal life more than a government program. You can't kill them. Well, wailing, gnashing of teeth, screaming in the streets, insurrection, real insurrection being promised by Democrats, of course, because they're the Marxist revolutionaries, because an attempt is actually being made to cut government programs. And now, a quick intermission while I mention an amazing interview last night, or press conference, which Trump and Musk held in the Oval Office with Musk's little kid doing his best to steal the show. What was really interesting was how they laid out what they were doing, why they were doing it, and how the voters had asked for it. And that's really key. The voters asked for it and what they were finding. And let's come back again to people who can't be bought. You know, our founders had money, had made money, some from slavery, it's admitted, but they all were prepared to lose every cent in order to found the country. And Trump made money, had money. He had more money, but he's lost some. And people still keep trying to steal it from him. But he's prepared to lose all of it to save the country. Elon Musk has so much money that many countries couldn't buy him. And yet, he's willing to work for nothing to try and find out what's wrong with government and stop the country going bankrupt. Stop it getting so broke, in fact, that the Chinese could buy us for a cent. Because that's what happens when a company goes bankrupt, is that somebody comes along and says, well, I'll assume the debt, but it's mine now. Well, what happens if that happens to a country? Do you want to be a wholly owned subsidiary of China or Russia or some other country nearby? Hell no. So he's doing almost, you could say, God's work, except I don't think Elon Musk himself is a devout Christian, but Trump seems to have become. And so they're sifting through all this stuff. So first I want to establish that Elon Musk is what the people voted for, and folks shouldn't object. And then let's get on to the lawfare. No, not the lawfare against Trump himself. Something like 53 or 54% of the people didn't give a damn, and a lot of the others didn't care much because he got voted in spite of all the attempts to label him some kind of crook, which he never was. And so in that interview, in that press conference, they laid out the what and the why and some of what they were finding. And they made the case. And Steve, I'll send you a link afterwards. There's a town hall article which lays out the executive order creating Doge on January 20th, long before there were any protests, explaining its legal basis and how it was to go about cutting departments. And it all looks very sound, by the way, the reasoning in the executive order. So we have sound reasoning, we have something the people voted for, we have an executive branch trying to exercise its executive authority within its purview, the departments reporting to it. And oh my gosh, did they find a mess? Did they find corruption? They especially found money going to NGOs, local, foreign and domestic, let's say it the way it is in the Constitution. And these are enemies, foreign and domestic, whether they are bringing in illegal immigrants and not supporting them or making them self-sufficient. The various so-called Catholic charities and other NGOs that are bringing in immigrants are, in fact, simply putting them on the government dole, putting them on welfare, getting them into government paid-for housing, taking more of your money than even the NGO took in the first place. And what about the international ones that are doing all sorts of things, including contributing back to Act Blue and Democrats, but most importantly, they're fomenting revolutions in places that the people never wanted to foment revolutions. We, the people, think more like Jefferson and maybe Monroe, which is, roughly speaking, don't get entangled in foreign affairs, and certainly don't get into wars that you don't need to get into. And the Monroe side of it, which is to have outsized influence in our own hemisphere for our own safety, nothing else. And so we start to cut. And judges pop out of the woodwork because that's what they do. Notice that it's the Massachusetts-centered First Circus that seems to be up at bat mostly. You know, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, or maybe an odd one from Seattle. And they're saying, well, you can't cut that. You can't fire those. You can't shut that agency. Actually, you can. You can't stop spending. You know, would a judge ever order a person to bankrupt himself to the point where he wouldn't be able to make future payments? Maybe an odd, crazy one, but generally not. So we got these judges saying to the executive branch, you can't execute. And there's a big flaw in the whole thing, which is a local or a regional federal judge is trying to tell the executive branch what it can and cannot do within the executive branch. And as I recall from a legal point of view, that if the states have a beef with each other or the federal government, it's a matter for the Supreme Court. And secondly, these small judges and circuits really don't have the authority to create national injunctions to stop the federal government from functioning, especially doing what the people voted for. And so, at some point, these judges have to be told, and I think maybe it was Jefferson who basically says, well, that's an interesting order, now try to enforce it. You know, and Trump's trying to do this the right thing. He even said so in the press conference last night. He said, you know, do you intend to obey these court orders? Well, yes, but I'm going to appeal them. Well, at some point, you have to say, hell no, we're not going to obey these orders because they're unconstitutional and they make no sense. And this is where I'm going to ask Steve to find an article that I wrote a few years ago during Trump 1.0. I believe, and I'm pretty sure I covered it, that Clarence Thomas, amongst others, is itching to slap down these podunk judges and tell them they don't have the authority to write national injunctions. It's got to be stopped. You can't have the tail wagging the dog. If 77 million people said do this and one judge says don't do this, that's clearly wrong. If the acting HHS secretary and the president says stop mutilating children for transgender madness, and Letitia James says I'll sue my nearby hospitals if they don't keep doing it, who's right and who's wrong here? Well, Letitia James is one of those people suing to stop Trump doing what the people voted for. And I think she's going to get her comeuppance. It would be only just and reasonable. But long and the short of it is, I don't think there's any legal basis for one judge in one corner of the country to try and stop national policy. And it has to be tested, and it has to be tested in the Supreme Court. And I can think of 3 people who are originalists who will definitely uphold this, and maybe 3 people who are a little squishy on the idea because they're not wholly originalists, and 3 liberals who'll go nuts and vote against it. The question is whether the originalists will outpersuade the wimps if this comes to the Supreme Court, and it must. You can't wait until the country is bankrupt, Social Security has gone kaput, the currency is collapsing, and everybody is scrabbling for a living. The only people that win in those circumstances are the communists or the National Socialists. I say it that way because it was the bankruptcy and inflation of Germany that brought them Hitler. It's a Cloud and Piven technique to try and collapse the structures of government and society so they can remake it in their image. Remember November 2008, anybody? We are weeks away from fundamentally transforming this country. Well, we've had 4 terms of Barack Obama, with Trump in a little box in the White House in the 3rd term of Obama, trying like hell to fight the machine that Obama had established. It cannot go on. The country will collapse. And who knows if the good guys will win if there's a second revolution. This is an attempt to restore the country as founded by its first revolution. And that's why it's so important. And that's why these little judges have got to be slapped down. We can deal with the details later. Congress can disestablish the circuit. Congress can impeach the judges. Remember that corrupt one in Florida that actually got impeached? Oh, and then became a congressman? I forgot his name, but I remember that happened. It can be done. And again, I repeat, bad circuits can be dissolved by Congress. And do you really think that Congress will have a smaller Republican majority in a couple of years? I don't think that's very likely. Look at the way the polls are trending. Trump's trying to do what the people want, and the beast is trying to stop him. People are going to hand him St. George's sword, or maybe even King Arthur's sword, and say, slay the beast now.
That seems to be what's going on. By the way, I think you meant Elsie Hastings. Does that sound right?
That's it. Yep.
Following a 1983 criminal trial, Hastings was acquitted. However, he was impeached for bribery and perjury, and then later became a member of the U.S. Congress. So, I mean, what the heck? Yeah, we have had these judges who issue temporary restraining orders, gag orders, all kinds of things from a local, county, or state level. And I was writing some stuff about this today, and I agree that America voted for Elon Musk because he was walking around with the guy for weeks, and they were saying exactly what they intended to do. And Democrats were like, oh, it's okay, they'll never be able to do it. And then he comes in with his dream team, and they just start mapping payment systems. That's all they did. And the Democrats lost their minds, and rightfully so, because as you pointed out, thousands of NGOs, just giant tentacled monster of money just being spent on all kinds of things, while we should say, hang on, people in storm-ravaged parts of the nation were living in tents while
Right, just imagine, just cover that. Just imagine how many of those storm-ravaged people could have been kept in hotels in the worst of the winter weather for that 59 million that went to New York for 1 week of illegal immigrant housing.
exactly, and that's part of the problem. The Democrats have decided that this is a hill to die on, that they're going to defend this spending, and I just don't see how it works out well for them. Do you?
I don't either, and I hope that it's not going to work out well for them. You know, they're masters of persuasion. You know how we'll know if things have changed for the better, Steve? Well, the Democrats often push government to the edge of shutdown so they can blame the Republicans, so that we can get a cromnibus bill, that's a crammed through omnibus bill, so that they can make it into a Christmas tree and attach all sorts of stuff. Which leads me to a couple of the bêtes noires in Congress. Mike Johnson has a terribly difficult job with a thin majority, as he had in the last session. When it came time to negotiate a spending bill, he had a few awkward Republicans, and he ended up siding with or ganging up with a few Democrats to put something together that might stand a chance of getting through the House and Senate. Now, that's a tricky needle to thread, and you can argue that he should simply have not done it and blamed the Democrats for the shutdown. Perhaps he should. Where I'm going is you've got a little handful of people who are such purists that they would throw the baby out with the bathwater. Thomas Massey in particular. I understand and admire your pure conservatism, but at the end of the day, you have to take the least damage over the most damage. If you must keep the government running, then so be it. Isn't it better to have a bill with a few things you'd rather not have that gets through on Republican votes only than have a bill with a lot of things you'd rather not have that gets through on Democrat votes? You got to stick together, guys. You really got to stick together. And I think Trump's doing a masterful job behind the scenes of rallying these troops and keeping their morale up. I'm pleased and surprised at the progress in the Senate on the nominations for that reason. But this is going to be a tough road to hoe. But where I'm going is the Democrats are out there saying, we're going to shut down the government. What, to stop payments going out or to stop Trump from preventing payments going out? Let me just give these guys a clue. First of all, we'll know the sea has changed if we get close to a government shutdown and the Republicans are able to successfully paint the Democrats as the villains, which is something they always fail to do. Well, guess what? There's money, lots of money, and free speech, Twitter X, that's going to make sure the message gets out. I think somebody's already spending money. There's pro-Trump ads running on TV all the time. Not election intensity, but it's out there. And I'm going to tell you something else. There's disaffected Democrats out there. Lindy Lee and Nicole Shanahan are beyond pissed off with the Democrat Party, and they want to do something about it. Don't be surprised if these people gang up with the Republicans against the rump of the dying Democrat Party, because they were lied to, cheated, stolen from to get money that Kamala Harris burned. And when you thought she couldn't burn any more, she found $20 million that somebody would loan to her and burned that too and left the DNC bankrupt. So, boy, oh boy, these people that were lied to and told Kamala might win are really, really ticked off, and they're beginning to realize that those policies were bad. It's just possible there's going to be more help than you could ever imagine for Donald Trump getting this through. If they can sell the country on the idea that Democrats shutting down the government is bad, they've scored a major win. But dear Democrats, I got a bigger warning for you. Do you remember during a couple of previous government shutdowns, I think it may have been in the Bush administration, because Obama didn't care when he got a government shutdown. He made sure he shut down the things that the people would feel the pain from, like parks and payments. And yes, civil servants were not paid and not paid back after that shutdown. Obama was mean and vicious. I think it was during the Bush administration, W. Bush that is, that there was a government shutdown, or maybe it was a debt ceiling fight. And they said, fine, let's move around the money we have. Let's make sure we pay the essentials, Social Security, the troops, stuff that we really, really must pay. And let's let the other stuff wait. And they faced down the situation. Well, let's just imagine all these payments that we don't want that are bankrupting the country. And now you'd force a government shutdown. Well, if you've got good cabinet secretaries, they shuffle the funds. They pay what they think will keep the country going and the people fed or whatever. And they stop paying the things that the Democrats had hoped to restore payments for. So, dear Democrats, make this a hill to die on, because I think your NGOs are going to get starved even worse. Prove me wrong. Change my mind. Get me a cruiser table.
Well, I think that one of the beauties of this is that DOGE continues to do what it does in whatever agency it can get into. And every one of them has some kind of pollution in it. And every time somebody points that out, this agency is wasting millions here, millions here, millions here, and they tell you what the projects are for. And this is getting out to the American people. It's coming out on X. It's coming out on social media. It's coming out on Newsmax. It's coming out on Fox News. It's coming out on Joe Rogan's show. It's just everywhere.
It's coming out through the New York Post and the Washington Examiner and the ones, and maybe the Boston Herald, the ones that are not socialist rags.
Correct. And so there's plenty of media out there to get this in front of people who can then, have water cooler conversations about, hey, did you see they wasted, $35 million on contraceptives for cats or something? I mean, I just made that up, but there's probably some research funding for that someplace. I swear to God, it's like,
don't forget condoms for Gazan terrorists who use them somehow in their bomb making. I'm still trying to get my head around that.
Thank you for supporting our cause. So yeah, there's just so much garbage, and I think the average person in Congress doesn't even have the slightest idea just how much waste, fraud, and abuse there is. They just know that that's their lifeblood, that, this beast is funneling money and laundering it through all these NGOs, and it's being uncovered, and that looks bad, and yet they're still defending it. So as we kind of run out of time here, a few closing thoughts, and if you think that this I don't know, landslide of bad spending that's going to keep coming out regardless is going to be enough to say, help us in 2026.
Yeah, I think so. So let's just I had another thought wandering for a moment. But you're right. In Congress, I don't know how many Republicans are funded in whole or by part by these NGOs. I think mostly not. I think a lot of Democrats are funded by these NGOs, and if the Democrat Party loses its major money source, it's going to shrink fast, which is going to be really interesting. So let's see how that actually goes. I know what I was going to mention, Steve, as a side issue. The Sue Me Go Round, a merry-go-round of money, where NGOs sue some agency of the government over some policy thing and then get a boatload of money as a settlement or as a reward for their trouble, and then they turn around and sue the government again for something else. So they're basically constantly milking the beast as the beast becomes emaciated, because it's nearly bankrupt. But they don't care. They're getting money. And there's a whole milking machine of mostly Democrat agencies out there that are attempting to keep themselves going by suing the government over some imagined ill and taking the money and then imagining a new ill to sue them over.
Yeah, sue and settle became famous during the Obama administration. They used it as a way to funnel taxpayer dollars to favored groups. Biden's administration did it too. Basically, the way it works is they coordinate with them and they say, "Hey, sue us for this," and we'll just say no contest and give you a settlement. And they did that a lot. And I'm not sure if any of that will ever turn up to the degree that some of this other spending has. But if they can get into Treasury and really finish mapping everything that went on there, because everything the government spends goes through Treasury, they'd be able to find all of that and expose it.
I think they can, Steve. And I forgot to mention the other piece of Doge. So in the beginning, there was Elon and Vivek, and Vivek, for one reason or another, you can't have two people that smart running an organization together anyway, has gone off to run for governor of Ohio, and more power to him. But it's the entrepreneurial, almost autistic, beyond brilliant brats that Elon has brought in. Many of these who've made their own fortunes already at a very young age in Silicon Valley, and again, don't need the money. And that's key. They're willing to work for nothing. They can't be bought. They don't care about stealing Granny's Social Security check of a few $100 because they've got billions, or at least millions. These people are exactly what you need. They're not in there to see what they can get. They're not even in there to reduce their own taxes, because you know what? They're the kind of people that paying taxes is a nice problem to have because they've got so much. They're in there because between their own brilliance and their ability to read the code and AI, they're uncovering this crap. They're making bureaucrats sweat because they're saying to the bureaucrats, I followed this wormhole and it's got your signature on it. Would you like to explain what it's doing? Lots of agencies.
The next couple of years should be very interesting. I mean, we're not even a month in yet, and it's already just been so much fun. So we're out of time, and I wanted to thank you very much, sir, for taking time out of your morning to spend it with our readers and listeners, and I hope you have a great day. Okay, I'd like to welcome the world-famous Kimberly Morin, world-famous for writing for Granite State, of course, to the program. She is the head of the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire. We'll talk about that a little bit. But we're here to talk about gun bills, right? We are. Okay, cool. So where do you want to start?
We can start with two that will probably easily be shot down. Pardon the pun. Intentional.
All right, let's go.
If you want to do that. So one of them is, and these bills that I'm going to talk about first are bills that keep resurrecting themselves over and over and over and get shot down and fail every year, even when the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate. One of them is preventing anyone from possessing a firearm at a polling place. And what the bill says is you can't carry, even if it's concealed, you cannot carry a firearm to a polling place. And if you want to, you can vote absentee ballot, and they'll change the different reasons for posting an absentee ballot. So basically this infringes on two different rights: your right to vote and your right to, protect yourself. Because you can't do both at the same time. There's no problem that this is trying to solve. There's no issue. And if it's at a school, typically school's not in for that day, but you can only carry in a school concealed if you have a New Hampshire pistol revolver license. So random people aren't showing up with firearms at the polling places. This one will be fail. It came out of, they already had the hearing a couple weeks ago. It was voted out of committee, inexpedient to legislate. For those who don't know what that means the committee's recommendation is to vote it down when it goes to the full House. So this is just a ridiculous bill that enables criminals. It could totally affect, say a woman has a restraining order against someone, which we all know is just a piece of paper, means nothing. She goes to vote and she's not allowed to protect herself. There's no reason for it. It's a ridiculous bill. They've tried to push it forward all the time, and it's going to go nowhere because it's literally, this time they switched it up a little bit. So this one, it violates two different rights at the same time.
Well, this is very similar to the law that prohibits space aliens from carrying firearms at polling places because it's never happened. There's never been an incident with a firearm at a polling place in New Hampshire ever.
And you know what the funny part is? These are the same people. They're telling us to vote via absentee ballot. These are the same people who support this bill that believe that college students who are from out of state shouldn't vote via absentee ballot in their actual home states. So, yeah, gone.
Yeah, they're a little crazy. And that we actually had a hearing on a bill to prohibit college students from using photo ID as a proof of ID for registering to vote. And, of course, the regular usual suspects came out and they're like, oh, my God. And I'm like, I just wrote about it. It'll post tomorrow. And this is just how Democrats work. They've been pushing for 100% absentee ballots and vote by mail for like ever, right? Mm-hmm. And then, but none of these students can vote that way. And none of us can vote absentee in their towns or cities or states. But yet somehow we're violating their rights. Yeah. And I'm like, no, you're violating mine. You have more rights than I do. And a lot of these gun bills, it's all the same stuff. So no problems with guns at polling places. I do believe, given the majority that we have in both chambers, it won't even leave the House. It's just a piece of garbage bill.
It won't. It's another garbage bill, one that they keep resurrecting. Like I said, it will not get out of the House.
Okay, so that one is just kind of silly. We also have HB 159 and SB 144.
Let's go over another silly one first.
Oh, okay, cool.
Those are serious. Not that they're not all ridiculous, but the other one is HB 56. This time they took two bad gun control bills and melded them into one. This one is a gun control bill that requires mandatory waiting periods and also requires enhanced background checks. Now, for those who don't know, we already have universal background checks across the country in the United States. Anyone who buys a firearm from a federally licensed firearm dealer must conduct a background check. So your name, address, everything goes into the national database, and they perform a background check to make sure that you can possess a firearm, you can buy a firearm. So we already have that. But what this bill is trying to do is to make it so you can't have private sales, which, if you don't know someone in a private sale, you're asking for either a pistol revolver license or you go to a firearm dealer and you get a background check. The problem with this bill is the Women's Defense League, we wouldn't be able to train women because we'd be transferring a firearm to them in return for them paying us for our services for training them. So this bill, again, this has been around for over 10 years. And we've told them this problem every year. We've even had former Democrats on the committee, vote in our favor against this bill when we explained that we would not be able to train women how to safely and accurately shoot a firearm. Now, the gun controllers are always all about gun safety, but the reality is they care nothing about gun safety. This is just about control. So that's one part of the bill. Then they put in another part of the bill for a mandatory waiting period. So if you go to a firearm dealer, get your background check run, purchase a firearm, even though you should be able to walk out of it that day with it, they want you to wait 3 days. Now, this doesn't have exceptions for if someone needs one in an emergency. I happen to have listened in the past and have written about this, women who have had stalkers and had all the paperwork in place, had the restraining orders, they got a firearm, and if they hadn't used it that same day, they would be dead instead of their attacker being dead because they protected themselves. Again, this is just a violation of our fundamental human right to self-defense. It's already come out of the committee. Same thing, inexpedient to legislate. It's going to go nowhere in the House. This is just a more overreach by the gun control crowd in New Hampshire, which is funded by out-of-state lobbyists, funded by New York City billionaire Michael Bloomberg.
Yes, and as we all know that criminals are always going to wait 3 days for their firearm.
Exactly. Exactly. A criminal is going to wait and say, wait a minute. Here, well, first of all, criminals don't get their firearms legally.
Nope.
That's just, we could talk more about that and with the other two bigger bills. But yeah, they're not waiting 3 days. It's only the law abiding who are forced to submit and who will obey these ridiculous gun control laws. So it only harms us and enables criminals to more easily harm us. So that's why bills, they got to go.
I wrote a post on Substack, I think late last year, with the title, "If you can't guarantee someone's protection, you better not disarm them," basically. It was a little bit more, artsy than that, but that's basically the premise. I mean, you cannot guarantee their protection. In fact, you're not obligated to protect them at all. Therefore, you should not make it impossible for them to defend themselves.
Exactly. Okay. And that's what they're trying to do.
So what's next?
The next are the two big ones.
Okay.
And if people want to get more even details on this, you can go to stopredflaglawsnewhampshire.org. There's no red flag bills this year, surprisingly, and I'll explain why. House Bill 159 was a bill that was put in as an emotional knee-jerk response to Officer Bradley Haas being murdered a couple of years ago by a violently mentally ill person at the New Hampshire State Psychiatric Hospital. An unarmed security guard who was a former law enforcement for years, they weren't allowed to be armed, he was killed by this person who had a firearm. So what they want to do is basically, if anyone's deemed to be violently mentally ill by the state, they will have their firearms confiscated. Now, they don't mention anything else being confiscated, just firearms. So this is discriminatory against gun owners. As we all know, they're violently mentally ill people commit mass acts of violence in multiple ways. Arson, knives, cars, pressure cookers. None of these things are being confiscated, just if they happen to have firearms. And the really interesting thing is what we talked about before is criminals don't get firearms legally. In fact, there's a Department of Justice report from 2016 where they interviewed criminals in prison who used firearms to commit their crimes. And the majority of those criminals didn't get their firearms legally. So that bill does nothing to stop that. It does nothing to stop actual violently mentally ill people from committing other violent acts. And if someone's violently mentally ill, why are they being let out of the hospital? Why aren't they staying in there if you know they could potentially be violently mentally ill and act out on their aggressions towards other people? It doesn't make sense to pretty much anyone. The other thing with this bill is it could be easily turned into a red flag law. Just a few changing of the wording, easily be turned into a red flag law, which I will get further into in a minute with SB 144. And the other issue is it's the state deciding mental health. And I'm sorry, I don't know about you all. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat, but I don't have real faith in the state, especially after COVID. In fact, there's already been cases where patients were denied due process thanks to the mental health professionals in the state. There's already cases where they were held without having their due process, which is supposed to be like 3 days. So that's an issue as well. The thing about it is we need mental health facilities. Years ago, psychiatrists told politicians, hey, let's close down all these mental health facilities. We don't need to have them anymore. We have these drugs that we haven't tested long-term in any real clinical trials, where we heard that before. But these people seem to be able, these violently mentally ill people seem to be able to be okay with being out in the, amongst society. Well, that's turned out not to be true. It was a bad idea. Obviously, what we needed to do is make those mental health facilities not abusive, make them be a safe place for someone who is violently mentally ill to live out their life and be safe to themselves and from society. And that's one of the issues. That's what we should be focusing on. Excuse me. That's what the legislature should be doing, but they've been too cowardly to actually do it. Not implementing something like this that won't stop any of what they're supposedly concerned about from happening. That
seems to be the crux of just about every anti-gun bill I think I've ever seen.
Correct.
Can I ask you an odd question? Do you have a cat purring near you anywhere?
Oh, sorry. That's my bulldog
it's fine.
snoring.
It's cute. I just kept
It's my bulldog snoring.
Is that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's a very loud snorer. Sorry.
That's awesome. No, I'm leaving it in. I'm just going to... Okay, so let's go to SB 144. My Lord.
But real quick update. This hearing was last week. There were more people there against it than were for it. And you had some of the usual suspects like Bloomberg's handmaids. But they tried to present the weird thing about this bill is it is a Republican who's normally good on 2A stuff, Terry Roy, who is the sponsor of this bill. And what he said in testimony is, because we killed this bill last year. This bill was in last year. The Senate killed it. But he said the son, the officer's son, asked him to redo the bill this year. And he presented an amendment that day. I don't think the amendment's even online yet. The amendment is, you can't make a bad bill better. And the amendment itself is bad, and it's a bad bill. It just needs to be completely voted against. I haven't seen the exec session yet, which will be what the committee, the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, vote on this. I'm not sure how they'll vote because they'll have all the Democrats voting for it. And I'm not sure if the sponsor and co-sponsor, who's another Republican out of Litchfield, I'm not sure how they will actually vote on this bill because even, like I said, the amendment is bad. So that's sort of in limbo right now. Then there's SB 144, which is the exact, and I did a compare. I found software that compares. It's the exact same bill as HB 159. Word for word, other than the sponsors and the number of the bill, what the bill is, the number. It is the exact same bill. Only the sponsor this time is Deborah Altschiller, who is probably one of Michael Bloomberg's biggest allies in New Hampshire. Last year, I believe it was last year, Every Town for Gun Safety, which is funded by Michael Bloomberg, spent over $1 million pushing gun control. Just to let you all know, I've been doing this, and the Women's League has been doing this. Women's Defense League has been doing this since 2014, and we've won against every gun control battle. We've spent little to no money. They've spent millions. Excuse me, because the 2A community is so strong in New Hampshire. Obviously, we couldn't do that without the help of everyone here. But the bill is the exact same bill. I doubt she'd present an amendment with hers, but it's the same exact bill, which kind of tells you all you need to know. And that's why I say it could easily be turned into a red flag law, because God forbid this passed, and God help us if the gun control crowd were ever to take control over the legislature, easily switch out language in this. Easily. It's really hard to get bad laws removed. We know that because it took us years to get constitutional carry, which was basically removing a bad bill that was put in years before, over 100 years before almost. So that's why this one also needs to go the same way as HB 159 and just be shot down in the Senate. No Republicans are sponsoring it in the Senate. It's only the typical gun control crowd in the Senate who is sponsoring this bill.
I see Altschiller, Fenton, Long, Prentice,
Yep.
Rosenwald, and Perkins Cuoca. Is that how? I don't know how to pronounce that.
I think so, yeah.
I apologize if I screwed up your name, Senator.
Yeah.
I don't see any Republicans. Now, we have a supermajority of Republicans in the Senate, so... And this bill's never going to survive in the House, so I feel pretty comfortable saying that. But again, you're guaranteed to miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And you never really know, right? Until you get things in
Well,
process. And
it passed in the House last year.
did it? Oh, we had a slim majority last year, and
Yes,
we have a
it
better
passed in the
majority.
House last year. So last year it passed in the House because Democrats all support it because it's anti-freedom and it's a gun control bill. I'm pretty sure it will die a very slow death in the Senate.
Well, let's hope so, because
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it doesn't seem like, I don't know how many gun bills we had last year, but there aren't quite as many this year. No less dangerous, no less ridiculous, but every year, and if you're in another state, I highly recommend that you find local groups like Kimberly's, the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire. Of course, there's a bunch of them around here. New Hampshire Firearms Coalition. Gun Owners of America operates in the state. Different parts of the state have NRA chapters. And for the most part, when it comes to things like constitutional carry and due process rights, and not 100% guaranteed, but for the most part, they all gather together. And we have a lot of
We
other
do.
groups people don't even know about. But they tend to defend it, and we've had good fortune. The last time we had a Democrat majority, we had a Republican governor, so that helped. He vetoed any of those bills. The minute they get power, the minute they get the governor's office, they are going to rip all of this out. It's all gone.
One year they put in, it was just a legislative service request they ended up pulling. It was to repeal New Hampshire's Second Amendment, or at least have a commission to study it. Another one was to repeal ban all semi-automatic rifles, because that's what an assault weapon ban is. It's bad. If they have, we've already seen all the gun control they did pass when just the two bodies had control, and Governor Sununu had to veto everything. So this is why, and we do work with all the other Second Amendment groups. We work with all of them. This is why we all work together and we fight against all these bills, because if no one's fighting, then the legislature is just going to think, well, nobody really cares. We're fine. Nothing's going to change. I fled from Massachusetts. I know how fast that changed, because one of the reasons I left is because I couldn't practice my Second Amendment rights there. So it can change very quickly depending on who's in office. That's why these bills just have to be fought against and shot down. And what I heard was that hundreds of people were emailing the reps. So I will, the Women's Defense League posts on our website. We post how you can get in touch with your reps, who the reps are, and all the information you need to sign in opposition on the hearings. And I post that on Granite Rock too.
So let's just imagine, mental experiment, one of these bills gets to Governor Ayotte. Do we know she would veto it?
Governor Ayotte already said she would pass the gun confiscation bill in September of last year. I did not find out until recently. I posted a video of her saying she would support it.
Okay, I missed that too, but that's good to know.
Yeah,
So,
I think a
ladies
lot
and
of people
gentlemen,
missed it.
gun confiscation. No, we do not
She
want
doesn't
gun-
call it that, but that's what HB 159 is. Yes, she said she would support it.
It's a
she's
wellness
never been
check.
good on.
That's all it is. It's a wellness check. We're just going to stop by and see how you're doing, and then we're going to take all your firearms.
And well, first they're going to take you away, but then you're not really well, even though they think you're violently mentally ill. They're going to put you in the hospital, but then they're going to send you home.
You pointed out, and I was going to say, but you mentioned it already, that anybody who thinks that the government won't misuse this, or that certain political people in positions of power won't misuse this, really needs to revisit COVID. They need to take a look at how Canada handles assisted suicide. Government experts can and will do whatever seems like the right thing for them to do, which means hating people that they don't agree with, and they will do it. They absolutely will. You cannot give the government this kind of power. You cannot let them get their camel's nose into this tent. It just can't happen. So, we've been very successful in the last 2 decades, pretty much, in proving the right to Second Amendment self-defense. I said that wrong. I was trying to combine 2 different ideas into one word. And so, not everybody has that benefit. I mean, Vermont's been slipping. Maine's been slipping. Massachusetts, long gone, although there are certain cases in the court system that could cause problems for Massachusetts. But the best way to go about it is to just be persistent. You have a right to property. You have a right to due process. And no matter how many words they pile together and whatever number they put on that bill, you have got to step up for those rights because they're fundamental and they're basic. And without them, you can't do anything, and they can do anything they want to you.
And the scary part is all the times I've been at hearings, which is obviously it's going to be 11 years this year, the people who work for the state psychiatric organizations or whatever, they're always for gun control. Always. So how are you going to get a fair hearing or whatever if they know that maybe you have firearms and the government can come and take them away? I don't trust those people. They're kind of usually crazier than everybody else, which is why they went into that in the first place. No offense to those of you who aren't, but
once you become a government employee or somebody whose livelihood is dependent on the government or policy, it becomes very difficult for you to be unbiased and neutral. And so we've seen that, if you just look at the USAID scandal, there's tons of money going to tons of non-government organizations. And those include people who handle mental health issues. I'm sure there's every single possible, everything across the gamut. And they become dependent on that income. They don't have to look for customers anymore. The government sends them to them, and they just do what the government says.
Well, yep. That's why I always say that poverty is big business. They can't solve poverty because if they solved poverty, you'd have millions of people out of work.
Yeah, and a lot of extra money floating around. Wouldn't that be a thing? All right.
Exactly.
So tell us a little bit about the Women's Defense League, anything you have coming up, how they can contact you, and we'll wrap this up.
So the Women's Defense League is an organization run by women for women, and we teach women how to safely and accurately shoot, all while fighting for our Second Amendment rights in the state legislature. We have classes that we train women in all the time, basic pistol class, new shooters shoots. We have a Refuse to be a Victim class coming up. We have member-only events that are coming up. We just had a concealed carry conversation where women could talk about how to carry, how to start carrying. And we have our annual Second Amendment rally, which is coming up this year, save the date, April 12th. That'll be at the State House from noon until 2 p.m. We've been doing that this will be our 10th one. There was 1 year after COVID. We held the last rally the day after we held our rally, the governor shut down the state. So we had it right up until, and then that year they wouldn't give permits for anyone to have anything. And we are a nonprofit organization. We have to, do things the right way. So yeah, it's a great organization. We have amazing instructors. We were the first firearms training organization to have women's only classes with women only range staff. A lot of places will have ladies only classes, but there's a male instructor or a male RSO. Nothing against men, don't get me wrong, but sometimes women have different issues. And it's funny, I just wrote a blog on this today. Sometimes women have different issues and they just want to be with all women. Whether they were, had a bad experience, whether they were abused, whether they were assaulted. They just want to have that an environment where it's all women. Because sometimes when you're first going to learn how to protect yourself and practice your right, you can be very vulnerable. So we are still one of the only organizations in the state who actually offers that. And it can be really important. And we have trained girls as young as 6 to women older than 80. So it's been really, really interesting. I'd like to train as many women as possible how to safely and accurately shoot.
All right. That sounds like a great place to stop. Kimberly, thank you for taking time out of your day to talk to me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me, Steve.